As we know, creativity, doesn't sit within one company or one geography. It is all over the place, in a bubbling up everywhere as we speak.
We believe that indie agencies can bring unmatchable creativity, focus, and the benefit of deep specialism to their clients.
It now is very, very hard for an agency to get into a corporate. It's kind of created this moat around the corporate where there's a set of agencies that are on the books, and then there's a whole world out there that they're oblivious to.
So these agencies which have got this fantastic creative talent and the potential to solve many of the world's biggest problems aren't getting into the arena where they can solve those problems. It's changing the dynamic between the big incumbent players and networks and the small independent shops that often do by far the best work, but maybe don't have access to the brands and to the marketing teams that they'd love to work with.
So this is an opportunity to bridge that moat, essentially, and get that connection, get a path between the agency and the corporate so that they can bring in new talent, new best-of-breed agencies and skill sets.
They know that the agencies they really should want to work with are the ones who are already doing great client work. They're busy doing that great client work. But the onerous RFP and sourcing processes can mean that those busy agencies simply don't have the time to respond fully.
One of their big frustrations is the time it takes, the costs involved in making decisions and going through that process, and ultimately sometimes even the restriction in the options they have. So, put those things together, it is a frustrating process. And I think it's because the process hasn't changed for decades.
It's like there's so many amazing agencies out there to choose from, so many. But the problem is this: it's this problem between the supply and the demand. It is so inefficient in terms of processes around procurement, processes around RFPs, processes around getting paid, processes around getting compliant. And what it does, it creates what we call a creativity tax. It builds up the cost and time for both the agency and the buyer to actually work together, because of the time and complexity of doing that. So what our job is to remove all that complexity and make it dead simple, make it easy to find the very best creative talent for your project.
So the experience that I and others in the team developed from being agency founders, growing that agency, selling it, and also being on the other side of the desk, if you like, within corporations and within brands, is that we identified that there's massive inefficiency going on at the moment, and there's actually quite a lot of exclusion in this whole professional services or marketing services industry.
Yeah, and also to be fair, our market, so from an agency perspective, is also full of, I guess, dark arts. It's very fragmented. Like I said, so in the UK, 16,000. So as a buyer, it's often very difficult actually to understand the true value, the true cost. Yeah, because so many different agencies call things different things. The pricing's not clear. So, this market is ripe for making more efficient, more transparent, more simpler, more fairer, both for buyers and for these creative independent founded agencies. It's not just on the, it's easy to criticise the system from a large company perspective, but our own industry doesn't help it. It also adds cost and inefficiency and lack of transparency.
We know that agencies are frustrated with the existing process. But are buyers?
Do you know what? I think buyers are frustrated, and we know they're frustrated because we speak to them all the time. And one of their big frustrations is the time it takes, the costs involved in making decisions and going through that process, and ultimately sometimes even the restriction in the options they have. So, put those things together, it is a frustrating process. And I think it's because the process hasn't changed for decades. It is a pipeline process. You have few options going into the beginning of the pipeline. Those options work their way through the pipeline you have winners and losers, and ultimately, you have to make one decision, and it's quite narrow. With a network model, you have countless options. You can look across the planet at literally hundreds of creative options.
But what I always found really frustrating is if you had, for example, one preferred supplier, you were always fighting to get the best talent on your project. When I was client side, always fighting, because ultimately, what creates energy, from the agencies, what creates great service is competition. Yeah? And often it's too easy if you've won a huge, 2-year retainer, or you're the agency of record. It's easy to get lazy. It's easy to get stayed.
I think there's a few things going. I think one of the key things is that corporates are risk averse in general, and especially finance departments, which tend to host the procurement departments. I think they've always wanted to be able to have a certain level of control over potential risks around, the finances side of agencies, making sure that it's a viable business, making sure that the bids are competitive and they're getting a good price. But it's gotten layered on recently with other concerns around data and around IP and around the legalities, which I think have just really created this tipping point.
For example, in the UK, there are over 16,000 agencies, independent agencies, that span the whole spectrum from PR, digital, marketing, software engineering, UX, UI. But when you work for a big company, as I did for many years, you simply do not get access to that talent pool. You only ever get the opportunity to work with 3 or 4 agencies that come from the same pool, the same process. So often, all you get is the same answers from the same companies.
All too often, we focus on dictating the process rather than the outcomes that we want. And so we don't give enough space to brilliant, talented teams to challenge, reframe, and bring a new way of thinking to what we're trying to achieve.